And opening our eyes when we're ready. Well, welcome and thanks for being here. Today, I wanted to introduce my friend, Jeannette Friend. I'm going to start that over.
My friend, Jeannette Friend. That's okay. I'm going to own the Vata is here in the room anyway. Like I can feel it in my fingertips. So, you know.
All right. All right. Welcome to Sister Science Stories, everyone. Today, I wanted to welcome Jeannette Friend. Jeannette and I have known each other for many years. We met through yoga therapy. And currently, Jeannette's the co-owner of Liberation Counselling and is a registered social worker and psychotherapist in Ontario, expanding across the country with your credentials, I hear. Jeannette, I kind of have in mind a conversation I want to have with you, and it's about building Ojas. And in Ayurveda, that means building capacity. And I know your healing story. I know how you built capacity in your life. And I want to know if you can share a little bit more about that with us.
Yeah, sure. No problem. I met Jill in about, I think, 2014. I was in, I guess the only thing I could call it is chaos. My life was chaos. And yoga just spoke to me. I found that I had space to actually feel what I hadn't been feeling in my body for a really long period of time. And then I moved into therapy with yoga therapy with Jill and noticed that there was a lot of impact of trauma in my life that I was not able to release. And working with Jill helped me to do so. Started me on my journey of healing that brought me to where I am today. I was a housewife living in Alberta, really isolated, except for the few people like Jill that I connected with, and living a really difficult life, I would say. Not knowing myself very well, not understanding my body very well, and just trying to get through one day to the next without the shoe dropping. And that's really where you and I met. And a lot of the work that we did together in the yoga therapy realm of things was around trying to be present in my body as much as I could be in that time frame.
Yeah. So one thing that we know about you is that you have a very Vata dosha. And if we were to explain that to people who are just listening to us today, Vata just means like you have got lots of air and ether in you, which means you're well connected to inspiration and creativity. But it also means that the qualities of clear and light are in you. It's like not, you don't have a body type that kind of gains weight easily or is unctuous and juicy. You know, like you've got more exposed joints and you're thinner and taller, I would say. Like they say Vata people are taller or shorter than the average. But yeah, like you're that would be sort of your body frame, and your personality has got a lot of that air ether quality in you.
Oh, yeah, I'm up in my head,
You're
up in
up in
the air.
your head. Yeah, yeah. And so lots of this building capacity piece has to do with developing a relationship with the body.
Yeah, absolutely.
Tell me
Yeah,
more.
without it. Well, there's a brain body connection. And as a psychotherapist, that's one of the, basic tenets. The body keeps the score. Bessel van der Kolk, eloquently writes about how what's going on emotionally and psychologically is felt in the body. And it leads to disease if we're not able to find balance. Right? So when we talk about Ojas, capacity is really important for people who are in a Vata constitution in particular, I would say.
Yeah. Well, and it's, I mean, everyone needs it. So I tell us about your learning, your journey in terms of developing capacity to, yeah, developing capacity. Tell us about your
Yeah, the
journey.
wiki notes. I
Yeah,
had a client say
I
that to me.
mean,
Let's give me the
yeah.
wiki notes. Um, yeah, I think it started with you and I working together. It started with trying to figure out what it was that I was feeling within and releasing what needed to be released. And then when I moved away from Alberta, we stayed connected and I continued coursework with you off and on. Um, Ayurvedic science-based coursework, the year review. We just finished a book study and I'm waiting for the availability for the next one. And what I found was working with a group of women, because it typically was women in these groups, understanding how we can put some of these life habits into place and consider what's going on within in a different way helped me to attune a little more, right? To understand what was going on within. Because without that knowledge, I really couldn't figure out how I wanted to open up and expand the Ojas within. Right? Needed to know myself better. And so it has been, yeah, almost 10-year journey of, that's not what everybody goes through, but for me, there was a lot of trauma that I had to also heal from. So in conjunction with working with you, I also worked with a therapist pretty intensely, and so did my kids as well.
Mhm.
So between those two sides, the psychotherapy and the embodied healing, I was able to get to the point where I decided this is the work I wanted to do. And at 50 years of age, I went back to school, which was incredible. What a journey. But it brought me to where I am now. I'm a year into co-owning my own therapy clinic, and I love every second of it. I love working with the clients I work with. But I do find that the roots of where I started with you inform a lot of what's going on in the therapy relationship. Different languaging, same
Yeah.
processes, right?
Yeah.
So you'll call it one thing, and often when we're talking, I'll call it something else, right? But it's the same thing. And I always start when I talk to clients about life habits,
Yeah.
always,
So
because
tell me
without
about that,
that,
little habits.
yeah, like what are you eating?
Mm.
Are you drinking enough water? How are you sleeping? Are you connecting socially in ways that matter to you? Are you moving your body? Are you connecting with activities that have meaning and value to you? And those are like the 6 core areas that I look at when I'm first working with a client, because that's the foundation for the work we're going to do. And if any of these things aren't in alignment, in particular sleep, it's really hard to do psychotherapy. Not impossible, but it makes it harder. And what I'm noticing is as we do our work, I'm connecting with physiotherapists and I'm
Mhm.
connecting with naturopaths, because they actually anchor into those life habits as well. And they want to start there with any work that they're doing with clients. It's very holistic and
Mhm.
very embodied. And as a result, I'm also leaning more into somatics.
Yeah.
Right. It's really hard for a lot of clients that come to see me, particularly if they're really in their head, to figure out what's going on in their bodies. It's a big
Yeah.
deal, right? To sit with that. Often it's scary too, to go within and try and see what hasn't been noticed before, I think is a good way to put it. And if we talk about women in particular, society treats us and teaches us that our embodied knowledge is something we should question and doubt. That going within is really not the place we want to go. We want external sources of validation in order to feel healthy and well.
Yeah.
Uh, that little,
At least that's what we're being taught. Yeah. So
yeah,
tell us
that's
about
what
your
society
own,
teaches us.
yeah, tell us about your own life habits. Like what is in place in your day-to-day so that you can keep your ojas
Hmm.
where it needs to be so that you can be a successful business owner and practitioner.
I'd like to preface this with, I would love to say that I do this perfectly all the
Yeah,
time.
yeah. It
I
is so
would
true.
love
And
to be perfect.
I'm going to assume that you do everything you're about to tell us imperfectly.
Yep, and sporadically depending on stress levels, which the noticing of that is the really important part of the work I do for myself, but also the work that I do with others. So I really think this journey, though it's very personal, also informs how I show up as a therapist. So I want to put it in there, that idea of Kaizen, right? I do it
Yeah.
as I can when I can, and I notice I'm going to do it imperfectly. I'm probably going to stop some of the habits that I'm really anchored into sometimes. Like if I travel, for example, to go see my family, or if things get really busy in my clinic, I notice some of my habits will fall off.
Yeah.
What I've done in the work that you and I do together is realize that that's okay and it's not supposed to be perfect. And the ease in which I can bring those habits back is really interesting. Easier and easier
Yeah.
with a lot of self compassion.
Yeah.
So prefacing that, lemon water every morning, hot lemon water. I start the day with that because I find it just anchors my system and allows me and my brain and my body to say, okay, we're starting. The day is starting. I have a We've talked about this before. I love a long, slow morning. My vata-ness really needs, though my brain's ready to go and I have energy levels, I really need a slow start to the day. So often what goes along with my hot water is a little bit of contemplation, a little bit of journaling, and a mindfulness meditation.
Yeah.
So I often start that way. And then I move my body. And this is the piece that really can shift depending on how much time I have. If I have a longer period of time, I go to a yoga class. If I have less time, I'm at home and I'll do some stretching and moving. My physiotherapist recommends a whole bunch of things that are very much like yoga. So I just do my yoga poses, and that's where I start the day that way.
Like adding breath
Um,
physio.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. I body oil every day.
Hmm. Body
I
oil.
take, yeah, I take more time if I have more time. If I have less time, it's always my face, arms, chest, and feet, hands and feet. If I have more time, it's all over body oiling. I think that connects me with myself and gives me a little bit of grounding to start the day.
Beautiful. Yeah.
Yeah.
And you've had to, I remember a time in your life where that practice got to be 2 hours long. And now, as a busy clinic owner, you don't necessarily have the luxury of a 2 hour morning routine. And yet you know all the components of it, and you know which ones are your sort of go-tos.
Yes, and I check in. So if I need a bit more grounding, I do more of the meditative piece and I will go for a walk instead of like a stretch and a walk with my partner at the end of the day as opposed to in the morning, which is actually really great after dinner. It's something I just recently started putting into place and I find it's really helpful. I feel ready for bed after a walk and digestion goes really well. So either morning or evening, both work really well for me.
Well, and both are
Um,
the body triads where they are the times of day where we are best to be in our bodies. Like that's the time of day where your body is the strongest, the most capable, the most available to you. And so for a Vata person to be allowing themselves to sort of drop into the body in morning and evening is exactly what that constitution needs.
It's also the space and place where less thoughts get in the way of my noticing what's going on within.
Ah, yeah.
Yeah, so
So if I mean, the way Ayurveda talks about Ojas is that it is the container that holds, and the bigger and stronger this container, the more capacity it has to hold life. So as you develop this container, your body, as you tap into it and sort of feed it, nourish it, ground it, take care of it, what what are the benefits of that in terms of your ability to access the creativity, the inspiration, the energy, that helps you bring into fruition a whole business?
yeah. I think it feeds it, totally feeds it, expands it because it's almost a cyclical effect for me, right? The more open that container is or the bigger it is, the more creativity shows up for me, the more energy I have to have more creativity. So I'll give an example. I've got about, I don't know, 18 blog posts that are getting ready to be sent off one by one. And what I find is if I've actually anchored myself in my habits in the morning, that's the best time for me to actually have ideas and scribble them down. And at night is the best time for me to do the administrative work that I maybe have put off during the day. Not heavy stuff necessarily, but just if I want to connect with a therapy because I want to work a little more closely with it with a client, then I'll kind of explore that in the evening when things are low and slow. Or if I'm doing any learning, I usually do that in the evening. I
Interesting.
tried it in the morning and anxiety showed up a little bit for me. I need that low, slow morning in order to feel connected to the day. I also have more capacity to be present with my clients. Without this work, I don't think I could co-regulate, which is something that's really important in therapy, to
Yeah.
be able to match what's going on in the room and to slow it down as I need to. Because if we don't know what's going on within, we certainly don't know what's going on with the person across from us. We're not
Yeah.
really present for either. And so that's really important. So increasing that capacity, I'm working with some pretty, you know, heavy stuff. I'll put it that way. And so to be present, not get swamped by it, know what's mine, know what's theirs, and to be able to also feel what's going on in the room. That's absolutely a big part of the work that we've done together.
Well, and Vata is that. Vata is working in the energetics. Like Vata is in its pure form is prana, is life force, is energy, is universal wisdom. And it's like that's what talk therapy is trying to connect to, is sort of that universal wisdom that is inside of all of us, that intuitive knowing, that sort of what do you know about yourself? And it's a gift that is most prominent in those that have really tapped in Vata qualities, really tapped in to that air ether set of qualities. And so you have that innately. And yet you're saying that in order to access that in a really pure way, there's something about being in, let's even add the word tejas, being in your fire and being able to ground down into your earth, water, Ojas elements.
Absolutely. There needs to be that balance. Otherwise, think about a Vata running wild in a therapy session. Brainstorming and connecting thoughts and ideas and getting really what we call nerdy about things, we've totally left our client behind. Right? They don't really follow the same pattern, perhaps. Maybe two Vadas in the room, and that's something I have to be careful of. If I have a Vata client, which I do, I have tons of Vata clients, I
Yeah.
really have to ground into that low and slow, breath oriented, anchored presence so that we don't run away together. And
It's
I
funny.
find I need that in my personal life too.
Yeah, I just
Mm.
wanted to bring that up. You keep kind of talking about low and slow as almost being like a superpower for you. And
Yeah.
those two words don't typically like you don't say low and slow and then be like, oh, that person must be super productive or super like tapped in or anything. Because you always, those words just have a connotation of sort of, lazy, unproductive or whatever. And that you're using those words to explain bringing yourself low and slow is actually where your superpower shines.
It's
Can you?
embodied and intentional. Sorry, what were
Mm.
you going to say?
No, I was just gonna, yeah, tell us more. Embodied and intentional.
Well, you have to check in, right? When we're low and slow, we're checking in what's coming up for me. What am I noticing is coming up for them, whoever they are, right? Um, and what do I want to do with that information? As
So for
opposed
you,
to, sorry, go ahead.
almost bringing yourself into the present moment is getting yourself out of the spin, out of
Yep.
like all of the noise of Vada,
Yeah.
of like sort of the 24/7 consumer digital world that we live in, and you're bringing yourself inward and you're slowing down and yeah, like and I guess low just is that idea of just grounding?
Yeah, absolutely. There have been a couple of conversations, even in the recent past between you and I, where you're like, you know what? That's the grounding your body is asking for, right? That's the grounding. And we might think of that as pulling down, which for Vata it is, but I also look at it as expanding outward. Right?
Right.
More
Yeah.
capacity shows up for me, more discernment shows up for me. I can take in many different forms of data from my senses without it overwhelming me.
Yeah. I love that idea because I think that like Ayurveda talks about how Vata is the cause of 85% of disease in our world, and Vata controls movement.
Mm.
And I don't know, like just this idea that when we do something really fast, we don't necessarily pull all the nourishment out of it. When we do something really fast, we don't necessarily like create a long-term memory from it. When we do something really fast, we don't necessarily let the body have an experience of it. And there's something about being able to get out of that fastness, that the slowing down is actually where we are more effective at nourishing, at being present, at creating long-term memories, at yeah,
Creating relationships that are
creating.
healthy and supportive and secure, right? That feel safe and secure in our life. And that could be relationships with ourselves, the relationship with ourselves, with others, and the world around us as well. Right? For people who've experienced trauma, that's incredibly important. I think for people who are in that Vata constitution, it's more important than any of the other ones to be. I mean, that's my experience. Now you can speak to that. That's your area. But it's what we forget about in this really fast-paced society is it's not the goal, it's the destination. That's really the important piece. If you're doing something really quickly, it's the goal. Get through it, get through it, get it done, get it done. It's very production or productive oriented without noticing those qualities of being present with the experience. When you notice that, you kind of have to slow down, even from where you were prior. It may be not, slow as the turtle, but it's slower. As soon as you pay attention to the journey, it's in and of itself a slower process. Does that make
Yeah,
sense?
it is. And I think that we have been acculturated to believe that it's not as efficient to go
Mm.
slow.
No.
And maybe that's just the way society talks to us. I mean, even now, everything on social media is getting into like sound bites where our attention span can't hold anything longer than 30 seconds.
Efficiency is something we have to pay attention to. I think it's great if you're a computer-based production line. I think it's not healthy for human beings.
Mm.
I think
So,
that dopamine is something that is becoming a challenge for all of us. And if it's
yeah,
a soundbite, if it's a quick hit, if it's then we're getting those strong dopamine hits really fast, and then we're hitting that dopamine crash afterwards, and we just don't ever feel good. We feel really activated or we feel slumped, but we don't really notice that balance where we actually have that beautiful flow.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. And so I want to ask you a question about almost like your advice to uh I guess clients. I don't know. I'm from like now go back into sort of the social work psychotherapist training and that sort of science lens and lend itself to us here. Yeah.
In what way?
Just like that idea of, like you said, you have sort of basics that you talk to your clients about. And you said when they're doing those things, we can actually get into healing and some of the trauma work and everything that's happening, eating, sleeping, energy management, proper connection, that sort of thing. Like
Um,
I know my Ayurveda slant on that. And how does that come into like the work you're doing is in the ether, it is in the ideas, it is in the beliefs and the patterns and the non-physical. So,
it can be.
okay.
To preface that, trauma work is very embodied, right? So
Hmm.
we go very slowly into the body, and that's the source of healing. So I want to preface that. And a lot of the somatic work we're doing is very, very similar to what you do,
Yeah.
which is why we've talked about therapy, you know, Ayurvedic
Genetics. Yeah.
science. How do
Yeah.
they connect? Because they interweave so completely. If I wanted to talk about from a talk therapy, what we think of as traditional talk therapy perspective, well, these life habits give us the tools that we need to get into some of the deeper work. If
Yeah.
you're not sleeping properly, how can you be present enough to practice some of the skills and tools you might need? How do you stay in your window of tolerance? That space, you might call that line of balance that we weave around, right? How do we stay within our balance in order to not get emotionally dysregulated when challenges show up for us?
Yeah.
Right? If we're not eating properly, how do we have the capacity to actually be present throughout our day and not get overwhelmed by, say, work? If we're not connecting with people who matter to us in ways that matter to us, then we're often choosing authenticity and attachment, right? So I work with clients around that. What does an authentic relationship look like? What does safe, secure connection look like? And are you trading that in to for a sense of belonging? Right?
Yeah.
So what kind of social connections have meaning for you, and where can you be yourself?
And it is my experience that the more out of balance we are,
Yeah.
the more we default into those old patterns. We default into the ways of being that sort of got us where we are now. And the more we can sort of implement these small practices, the more capacity we have to be present to the fact that we have a different choice.
Well said, Jill. Are you sure you're not in psychotherapy?
I
we
have
have
different letters after my name.
If we look at emotions and behaviors, they're often masking unmet needs, right? And that's a psychotherapy kind of basic premise. Often we look at what need is not being met. And if you go deeper, often the needs that aren't being met, because we can find lots of ways to meet the needs of others. We are a people pleasing society. How do we look within and meet our own needs?
Yeah.
And for Avada, so important,
Yeah.
incredibly important, because often it's so hard for us to connect with what's going on within. So, how do you meet needs that you're not even aware you have? Eating. Vadas
Right.
often don't notice when they're hungry.
Yeah. They don't.
So, we have to actually intentionally meet that need. And then we notice what hunger feels like over time, right?
Well, and I think this whole idea then of sometimes the very first steps we can make into healing ourselves, we have to come into the body first. We have
Yeah.
to sort of get some sort of base level function happening where we are feeding ourselves, we're prioritizing our sleep, whether or not it's working properly yet or not. We're, giving it a good effort to sort of prioritize it. Um, and we are, like you said, finding good connections. Yeah.
Doing things that matter to us too. It's body oiling,
Yeah.
it's journaling, it's socializing, it's creative outlets. Like, what feeds your soul in terms of, do you write poetry? Do you like to, interior design? Do you all of this? Funnily enough, it starts within, right? And when
Yeah.
we meet those needs, you'll often notice there's a difference between those individuals you've met who are meeting their own needs and they're aware of it, and those that are struggling to figure that out. We're a growth in progress, all of us as human beings, right? It's a very human experience to learn, unlearn, and relearn, right? So, but you do notice in the room someone who's tapped into who they are and how they are in the world.
And so even that, like going back to the idea of we needed to be comfortable in our own skin.
Yeah.
And that is sometimes something we have to relearn because they say there's a saying in yoga that says meditation is like putting your head in the mouth of a lion. Like that's how safe it feels, right? And
Yeah.
sometimes that idea of going within, as soon as we touch that raw, vulnerable, authentic inner knowing, we want to flee from it because it
Absolutely.
feels, yeah. And so part of this building capacity, we do it on a really physical level by eating right, sleeping right, like managing our energy right. But part of it is just building the capacity to be in relationship with ourself.
Yeah. Low and slow, just like in the therapy room, we do it low and slow.
Yeah. It's funny. I love how you're saying that because low and slow, like you even think of um like a lullaby or like the bass line of a song
Yeah, it's
or
beautiful.
yeah, like just a really grounding yeah, lull.
Yeah. I talk about dipping our toe in the water too, right? We don't have to jump into the lake. We can dip our toe in the water and just notice what that feels like. Just notice.
Yeah. So all of it comes to building awareness.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So we're doing these things, we're creating like so when we talk about I think the way habits have been sold to our culture, like this idea of your life habits. We're sold life habits as a way to get skinny
Oh,
or
I've
have
fallen for that one. Yep.
yeah, or have good skin or I
Yeah.
don't know, like all these really superficial reasons which are true, I guess. But to me, they're almost like missing the point
Yeah.
of why we implement these life habits.
If I were to say the goal is so that you can proudly say, I am, then that's a complete sentence.
Mm,
That's my that's my human space and place, right? I am.
yeah. And I use the word svasta, and svasta in yoga and Ayurveda means seated comfortably in yourself. I have a
Yeah.
comfortable relationship with me. My
Yeah.
mind, my body, and my spirit are congruent. They speak to each other and they all talk to me, and I listen to all the pieces of me in terms of making decisions about what I need and want in my day.
And thank you for adding the spiritual piece of it, right? Like spirit piece of it. My apologies. Mind, body, and spirit, right?
Yeah.
When we are connected with all three of those elements of self, those are the conditions for healing. Those are
Yeah.
the conditions for growth. Those are the conditions for being self compassionate and compassionate with others.
Yeah. Yeah, and they do like they say that it's congruence, right? It's the fact that those pieces aren't kind of nattering at you against each other. There's no
Yep.
fight happening inside of you. There's no argument happening inside of you about sort of the best way forward. And I
Yeah.
find that lots of times these days we have a noisy voice that's very people pleasing, telling you all the things you should be doing. And then you have a quieter voice that's sort of saying, like, but this is what I want.
If we look at it from a neuroscience perspective, one part of our brain holds that internal critical voice. It has its purpose. What we want to do is make sure that it actually is contained, right? Motivation is one thing through a critical voice that says, hey, if you stay in bed in your pajamas all day, those things that you wanted to do aren't going to get done, noticed, right? Versus something that beats you up for taking a day off, that voice that beats you up for taking a day off because you need it. In an entirely different part of our brain is that self-compassionate voice that says, what does burnout look like?
Yeah.
I don't want to feel burnout, right? I want to take care of myself. I want to have a slow or low day. Bless.
So the idea is then, I mean, I think the idea is to be able to at least have them the volume button be equal for all the voices so that you have the opportunity to um benefit from the wisdom of all pieces of your being.
And from a psychotherapy perspective, is we can notice a thought is occurring, but we don't have to get hooked by it, right? We
Yeah.
can look at and take perspective, have a bigger picture, notice how we see ourselves in the world, like from that observing self perspective, which is often that innate inner knowing,
Yeah.
that inner wisdom, that little voice that says, are you sure?
Yeah.
Or
So
yes, and.
there's the crossover again, just yoga talking about be your own witness, become the observer of your own life. And as
Yeah.
you can step back and witness, we all can do that. It's almost like how you can look at someone else and you can see everything going on so clearly in a way that you never have that clarity in your own self.
We either do that or we micro, like we look at every tiny aspect of who we are and how we are in the world and we we find fault for it, as opposed to we can do that with other people, gain balance and say, well, I understand why that person is how they, doing what they're doing and why they're doing it. And of course they're doing that. Of course that's the way that they're showing up in life. But
Yeah.
we really struggle to do that for ourselves as well.
Yeah.
Again, it's about balance.
I love it. Yeah. There's so many crossover points. It's lovely. Okay. So tell us then, I mean, your yogic background is, I'm going to say, pretty in depth.
Yeah.
And now the work you've done in your master's degree over the last couple of years, and then even the embodied work in your counseling. What's your takeaway? Like how would you recommend if we walked into your office right now? Yeah, how do you direct us?
It depends on what you come in to work on too, right? If you're looking at, I know somebody's coming in and they want to work on anxiety. Is that sort of what you mean?
Sure.
Or, yeah, okay. I mean, for an initial assessment for me is typically the same. I look at a whole bunch of different things. How are you life habits? It
Yeah.
really truly is getting into and digging a little deeper about what's going on within in your relationships, how you are showing up in life, right? What matters to you? Are you attending to it?
Yeah.
So
I-
the life habits piece, like I said, is a huge part of what I do at the beginning of my work with clients.
Yeah. And then direct them to start to, like, please pay attention to and support these things.
Slow steps, right? Sometimes I have clients that come in and they don't have a frame of reference for this, right? Conditioned patterns of behavior. And one of the things that we notice, sorry, when we start to look within is we get a chance to notice that those patterns of behavior are just showing up and we're not sure why. Like that default doing without understanding the being part of it. And this is where yoga really helps me in my work, because the doing and the being, that's very Buddhist too, but the
Yeah.
doing and the being kind of connect. How can we have balance between those two parts of our life?
Yeah.
And even if it isn't anxiety, if it's anxiety or depression, relationship conflicts, trauma of any kind, typically the foundation is looking at what does your life look like in the here and now? And how can we help that here and now feel a little more easeful? Right? What skills and tools are required for that? Well, you have to understand what's going on before you know what things to put into place that will be helpful. So again, we go back to the foundation of who are you and how are you in the world?
Yeah. And I mean, that's what you're describing now is sort of like that whole idea of our year of you program and how we go through the 10 habits and we understand that on paper, they're simple. You don't need to be a rocket scientist to understand any of them. You don't need to learn a new language. You don't need to even understand what yoga and Ayurveda are. They're simple habits. And yet, because of our conditioning, because of our beliefs and patterns, they can be hard to implement. And that's where you're talking about just being like you can observe what's going on without understanding what's
Yeah.
happening behind it yet.
And what I love about your program is it's across a year, which is
Yeah.
lovely. And you're repeating in 4 separate kind of phases throughout the year the same 10 habits. And you're connecting on a weekly basis with a group of people who are just as human as you are, engaged in the same struggles that you are in. And that is so important, to be seen and heard and to
It's
have that understanding. When we are seen and heard, I don't know, it creates a beautiful space and place for us to figure out what healing looks like and to be the generator of our own healing.
Yeah. We do need safe spaces to sort of show up and
Yeah.
test drive our new beliefs and test drive our new voice, test drive the voice that is setting boundaries, test drive the voice that is advocating for ourselves, test drive the ideas that are behind sort of our new goal setting that we're doing and how that might be having a ripple effect into the relationships around us. And so it does provide a container for that sort of growth. But it
Yeah.
also, I think, is almost like this little incubator, the safe little incubator space for
Yeah.
some of this base level work that we need to do in order to sort of grow into the person we want to be. And I just I just look at you with such admiration for the implementation that you've created in your own life of all of these ideas and how you've watched yourself fill life really, really full because of the way that you've built it.
Yeah, it's completely different from when I started this journey, for sure. Everything is different about my life. All of my relationships are different. What I choose to do in my work life is different. How I choose to find a partner and found a partner is different. Everything is different. And it did start. It started with you.
Well,
It
it's
started with working with you.
yoga. It started
With
with
you.
yoga. Yeah. Yeah. Well, it always, the teacher appears when the student is ready. And likewise, I can say that about my relationship with you. Like, you become my teacher in ways when me as a student is ready. And that's what always leads you and I to have such delicious conversations.
Yeah, agreed. And if we circle back to container, there's so many elements here. I'd love to, like, my Vata brain wants to go everywhere. But I think we expand that container through doing the work that you're providing the focus for. Does that make sense?
Yes.
What I just said, those slowly developing habits over time with practice, knowing why we're doing it, knowing why it might be difficult to do it, noticing what comes up, what needs, what behaviors, what emotions are showing up, why we're feeling blocked, when we need to get out of our own way,
Yeah.
what it looks like when we're checking boxes and we're like, we're doing all this stuff and it doesn't feel good because we're bypassing, we're not experiencing what's going on with these moments in our life that we're putting in place. So then it's that understanding of shifting out of checking boxes and into what just feels right to
Yeah.
do,
Yeah.
right? And
Yeah.
then ease, that's where you notice the container expands. When we start to talk about as a community, this is easier.
Mhm.
Doing these things is easier. Life feels a little less stressful. My body feels a little less stressed out, right? My relationships have become a little more easeful, little by little. And that's what happened for me, little by little. I
Mhm.
didn't have that, oh, Hollywood, aha moment, and then everything changes. Well, I
Yeah.
call bullshit on that. There is no aha moment. There are many, many moments of noticing and then wondering, what do I want to do with that information? And then trying things.
Yeah. And I think it's really important that we use these habits as tools, not rules. Like, we
Mm-hmm.
don't ever, like you said right at the very beginning, we're not experts at it. We don't do them perfectly. They fall off when we go traveling or when we have a busy schedule. And then what happens is that your body sort of comes in with a little reminder, and it sort of taps on the door again and
Yep.
goes, "Hey, remember me? These habits over here." And it'll come in with some little symptom
Yeah.
that just tells you, hey, you're starting to fall out of balance. And then you're like, oh yeah, thank you. Thank you for the reminder, which is why you can go back into them with
Mm-hmm.
ease, with compassion, without sort of like the all or nothing, I have to get 100% or I fail idea.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
that's really where we start to notice a lot of change. I noticed individually, and I noticed our group, the women in our groups, noticed the change was when they could hold it a little more lightly.
Yeah.
Notice what works, notice what doesn't, notice when it's, more difficult to practice, notice when it's easier, and just that, I don't know, it's this, I think we've talked about it, that idea of what's happening, so what, why does it matter? And now what do we want to do with that information? The ease of that versus that psychological rigidity of, I have to do this, I must do this, I should do this. And then we're constantly beating ourselves up over that because, well, we're human. We're not going to be able to follow rules so rigidly. And when we have those expectations, it just leads to a lot of suffering.
So it is almost like, I'm not positive if this is cultural or if this is just like humankind, but it is almost coming out of those expectations and cultural assumptions that it has to be productive or fast, or there has to be an efficiency around it, or it has to be all or nothing. I don't know. I don't know if we're fed this or if there's just a human thing that clicks in, but it is about bringing in that quality of flow, bringing in that quality of ease, bringing in that quality of like simplicity, compassion, these soft skills that allow us to be in relationship with our own life habits,
Yeah.
in
Nice
relationship and
point.
listening.
I
Yeah.
would say from a neurological perspective, we are oriented towards pleasing others. So and to have them please us. That's the piece we don't necessarily anchor into as much as getting our needs met. We're very focused on meeting others' needs into the point of where we can be people pleasing. And that perfectionism actually is I don't know, what do I want to say? Um, untethered state of wanting to do well. I'll put it that way. Right?
Yeah.
That, of course, we want to do well. We want to do something, do it well, learn something from it. And perfectionism is that wanting to grow in a very rigid and
Yeah.
maybe even very process oriented way, right?
Controlled, controlled, controlled,
So I would
controlled.
say, yeah, society has a huge impact on this. Part
Yeah.
of moving my body is getting outside.
Yeah.
The connection that we have with nature helps to ground us. And when we notice what's around us, we slow down.
It's, to me, it feels sad that we live in a world that is built to work against us.
Mhm.
And
But if you,
it's almost like our job is to kind of continually come back to ourselves and connect inward so that we can tap into some of the gorgeous universal wisdom that exists inside of us instead of always being driven and controlled by the external messaging.
yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
it can completely swamp us, and then we're wondering why we're doing what we're doing.
Yeah. Yeah.
Agreed.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Mm.
Oh, okay. Jeannette, thank you so much for this conversation today. Any last sort of nugget of wisdom you want to give to us?
Don't put me on the spot or anything, right?
No.
Interestingly enough, what would I say about this entire conversation that we've had? I think if we are trying, that's all that anyone can ever ask for us, and that's all we can ever ask for ourselves. So just that act of trying something means that we learn and we grow, even if it's not successful,
Yeah.
right? So of all of these 10 habits, the most beautiful thing about them that I've noticed is that the people in the group that I've worked with, and a couple of groups that I've worked with or more, is that they make it their own,
Yeah.
right?
It's essential, isn't it?
Yeah. Yeah,
Yeah.
they're great little ideas around these core areas of life that if we're implementing them, then life feels richer and more meaningful. But we get to decide how we implement them. We get to decide when to implement them, how, and how often.
Yeah.
That's what's very individual.
Yeah. And I think the whole point of the habits is that it creates this clarity in our bodies, clarity to that connected wisdom so that we are more, it's almost like the more we practice them, the more able we are to practice them, which is the whole idea of building the Ojas, building the container.
Yeah, agreed.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Thank you, Jeannette.
Yeah. Thank you for inviting me. This has been wonderful as always. We always have wonderful conversations.
Yes, we do.